دوستان سلام عرض میکنم. عباس میلانی هستم. پنل به انگلیسی خواهد بود. It is my distinct privilege to welcome two of our dear colleagues from Stanford Law School, Professor Alan Weiner and Professor Bailey Ulbricht. They have launched a program at the law school that is the focus of our discussion. Alan has been familiar with the Iranian political scene for almost 40 years. He began as a U.S. State Department lawyer and has had many dealings on legal matters. And Ms. Ulbricht is an old hand at human rights and rights of the people abused by oppressive regimes. And they're going to tell us a little bit about the project that they have launched at the law school in conjunction with the Iranian Studies program and how it is relevant to our meeting here. Thank you, Alan.
Well, Dr. Milani, it's an honor to be with you today and to be with all of you here today. Let me just describe very briefly the nature of our project and then ask my colleague Bailey to talk about it a little bit more. So we recently at the law school launched a new program called the Stanford Humanitarian Program, which is interested in humanitarian issues, international humanitarian law, and human rights issues. Our goal was to try to do work that would bring what we know from the university, what we know from research, what we know from scholarship, and through interdisciplinary connections, and try to bring those skills to bear in helping to solve or address real-world challenges. And it didn't take long before we were approached by a number of individuals who were in connection with people in Iran or near Iran who were beginning to report and collect information about crimes that are being committed, abuses that are being perpetrated by the Iranian regime in the wake of the latest round of protests. And the question was, could we do something in conjunction with you, in conjunction with the Iranian Studies program and your expertise about Iran and your deep connections to people who are knowledgeable about Iran, to see about beginning to develop a database of evidence about these abuses. And Bailey, you could talk a little bit more about what we're hoping to do with that project. We're still in an early design stage, but perhaps you could talk a little bit more about what we're thinking about.
Sure, happy to, Alan. So we're kind of envisioning this as more or less a centralized clearinghouse for potential evidence of human rights abuses occurring currently and recently in Iran. We're thinking now that will have three main components. The first one is a collection element where we aim to partner with organizations collecting this information already on the ground, as well as activists who are directly documenting it, receive the information, and then deploy our team of legal experts to catalog it according to the abuse that it is purporting to show, as well as the element of the particular crime it's purporting to show. And this we think is important because as we start to get a better picture of what information we have, we can go back to people on the ground and say, this connecting evidence is critical if we want to be able to prove this in court. So that sort of cataloging and classification we think is unique and could serve a real benefit in the future. The second component is a long-term storage element. And here we're looking to deploy existing techniques that are already being explored by legal experts for long-term storage of digital evidence with an eye towards authentication. So particularly what that looks like is how can we make sure that this digital evidence is safe, is secure, and how can we prove that it is being held under proper chain of custody procedures so that when it comes time for it to be used in a formal human rights investigation, in judicial accountability, or even just to show that it's trustworthy, we have that documentation in place and we are using those proper techniques. The third component is a verification component. And we understand that it is very unlikely that we will ever reach 100% certainty for the evidence we receive, but we hope that we can review the evidence that we collect and develop a sort of system where we can say to a certain degree of certainty, okay, this was not doctored. This is not a video that's, a deep fake or something like that. It does actually purport and align with other reports on the ground. And this is where our collaboration with the Iranian Studies Program and other actors in this space is going to be so critical, because that understanding of Iran and those deep connections will be very important when we work through verification. And I'll just wrap up by saying, we are very eager to partner with existing organizations. There's a lot of expertise and work already being done on Iran and particularly on human rights documentation. So we're eager to work with everyone who's out there and kind of really serve as more of a centralized location for all of these this potential evidence to come together.
Yeah, we have been struck in a very short time. We've talked to some individuals who have said, like, oh, I know about some groups that are collecting information. And then 2 weeks later, I had a conversation with another former colleague of mine from the law school who said, I was approached by a person, from the Iranian American community in New York, and she's linked to an organization that is gathering information. And these two organizations, as near as we can tell, are not in contact with one another. So we have these decentralized and isolated efforts. And certainly with respect to some of the patterns of crime that we're interested in, it's not only the evidence of the individual crime, but evidence of the pattern of crimes is very, very important. If we wanted to establish, for instance, that crimes against humanity, were being perpetrated in Iran, we see it was newsworthy that the vice president just 2 weeks ago announced that atrocities that the Russians were committing in Ukraine had the character of being crimes against humanity. As somebody who's worked on international war crimes and international violations of humanitarian law, I know that that's not a casual phrase. There are formal elements that need to be established. And one of the elements of a crime against humanity is that it is part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. And so being able to demonstrate the widespread pattern that it's directed against a civilian population. This is the kind of legal expertise and analytical expertise that we think that we can bring to help organize and make sense of, in legal terms, the evidence of crimes that's being committed, rather than rather than an isolated account of an activist being tortured in a prison, which is, of course, a terrible thing and it's a crime. But when we begin to be able to see the whole tableau of these offenses, it can have different legal consequences.
We have a concept in Persian, it's called mahkame pasand, which is something acceptable to a court. So my sense in our conversation was that you're trying to essentially systematize a process where the evidence these diverse groups are gathering become more mahkame pasand, so they can actually be submitted to a court of law. So how does that work?
Right. I think for American lawyers, we would consider the concept to be one of authentication. But Bailey's written about this, so perhaps you can discuss the process of establishing, how one authenticates evidence to be used, particularly digital evidence could be used in courts, foreign courts or international courts.
Sure. Yes, I should just say that, evidence law is differs greatly depending on what the particular court or jurisdiction is that is reviewing it. But generally speaking, digital evidence is obviously relatively new. Courts are still trying to figure out how to deal with these very difficult problems of, how you guarantee that a photo or a video hasn't been doctored between when it was captured and when it's being presented in court. And there are new techniques that legal experts are now bringing to the fore to say, like, oh, actually, there are some ways that we can guarantee it. One of them is through a system called, it's not really a system, but through a technique called cryptographic hashing. And that is a complicated mathematical procedure that I don't really fully understand, but essentially it works when a photo is taken and stored, there is a key attached to that photo that essentially locks it. And so whenever someone tries to manipulate it, that will be registered, and they will have to have the key in order to access and manipulate it. So this is a way that lawyers can submit a photo and say, we have hashed it using this trusted hash, and we have a very high likelihood that it has not been tampered with since being received and stored. The other technology that's often used in tandem with cryptographic hashing is something called a distributed ledger, which is the technology that underlies blockchain. Obviously, blockchain is used in a lot of different ways, but this particular storage mechanism is very difficult to hack, and even more difficult to manipulate once you hack it, for a lot of different reasons that I don't need to necessarily go into here. But that combination of two things can be used to authenticate a piece of digital evidence in a court, if it's 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, whatever. So those are two technologies I think we'd be interested in exploring. There are, of course, other ways to maintain a proper chain of custody for digital evidence. But yeah, those are at least two that we're interested in exploring.
And I'll just say two things about that. Number one, we have done some work with some other colleagues and partners who have been really at the cutting edge here based in Stanford. It's one of the nice opportunities of working in an interdisciplinary way. We've had the opportunity to work with some colleagues with an engineering background who have really helped us think about how we deal with this new information system environment and map it onto the kinds of ways of establishing reliability and trustworthiness that a court would want, ready for court. The second clear lesson is, this is why you see it's important to have people under the age of 35 working on this project, because this is a new frontier in terms of the technology, and we're way beyond introducing photographs and business records, which is the kind of thing that we used to be anxious about when I was a law student.
So I think one of the first things we should do in this joint effort between law school and the Iranian Studies program under the rubric of this program is maybe organize a webinar where you and whoever else can describe this process in more technical, legal language, and invite anyone who wants to come. I know you have already contacted some of the human rights activists, and the effort to create this kind of a webinar is in no way intended to say to those who are already working that we don't appreciate what you're doing. We're just trying to bring the common language, I think. Is that?
I think it's an excellent idea, and of course one of the things that I think it's an excellent idea, and we are, again, making contacts only now with people who some people we know, in fact, you facilitated introductions for us with organizations that are doing this work, and I think we also know that there are people who are gathering information, I think at great risk to themselves on the ground. Public telegram channels have been one of the important sources for the collection of this information. So whether those individuals are able to take part, I think, is a different question because of the danger for them. In fact, they're already at risk because if anybody knows that they're part of these telegram channels, even though the channels are encrypted and one's access to it, that doesn't stop a security official, a member of the Interior Ministry, from saying, enter your password on this phone, right? It may be encrypted, but it will be very difficult for you if you don't give me the password. But yes, I think an idea like a webinar like that to talk about these standards, again, standards also for different kinds of evidence, evidence that might be reports on a telegram channel, just simply textual material, photographic material, if there's recording. I mean, I think all of these present different kinds of challenges and issues, and it would be certainly wonderful for us not only to be telling people, but to learn as well about the different kinds of information, the different categories of information that's being collected, so that we can begin to think about whether there are particular authentication or evidentiary challenges with different categories of digital evidence.
So I think the first action item to come out of this panel is that we will certainly organize
Yeah.
it as maybe the first major webinar for this joint project. And I think we can invite anyone,
I think
not just the human rights activists, but anyone who wants to collect data to come and find what it takes to collect a mahkama pasand document
Right.
that can be submitted.
I think that's right. You know, it's interesting. I'll tell you you know, when I was in my time in The Hague, I was the U.S. agent to the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal, and had a chance to work with some of the families, the so-called dual national families, who are bringing claims there. And I recently was talking to another Iranian American. He's originally from Iran, now here, very successful venture capitalist. And I was telling him about this project, saying, you know, I thought maybe you'd be interested in what you think about this, given your connections to Iran. And he said, it sounds great, but what's the point? Why are you doing this? And I realized that what was implicit in that question was the idea that the Iranian regime would not be deterred from perpetrating abuses. Gathering this evidence wouldn't make a difference. And I've been reflecting on that. What's the point? And you and I have talked about this some as well. And I think there are some important reasons to do this. Number one, again, as we talked about, being able to analyze the legal character of offenses, crimes that are being committed, and to figure out whether there are gaps in being able to establish what kinds of crimes have been committed could be important. Number two, beginning to think about who's responsible, particularly at the senior level. We might know who the individual perpetrator is, who the person who abused you in a prison, but we've done a lot of work with war crimes prosecutions in understanding command responsibility. And if you begin to collect patterns of evidence, it becomes more plausible to establish who's ordering these crimes, who's behind them, who's not preventing these crimes from taking place at a more senior level. So these can serve as a basis for long-term justice and accountability processes, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, either in the international investigative mechanisms, perhaps one day in the international court. Also, there could be prosecutions in domestic courts in other countries, in Europe, which exercises universal jurisdiction. We've seen European courts prosecuting Afghanistan defendants, Iraqi defendants, Syrian defendants, Iranian defendants, and could also be Iranian.
They have been.
Okay.
In Sweden.
Right.
In Belgium,
right.
2 places.
So this evidence could be helpful there. This kind of data could also be useful for victims of a crime outside of formal accountability. We've thought about if individuals are trying to flee and seek asylum, could evidence of crimes that they were the victims of be helpful in supporting their claims if they're asserting they have a fear of persecution. Also, more generally, and this is something that I learned with my work in The Hague, dealing with the War Crimes Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, this kind of information is very powerful in helping to undermine denial and revisionism. I mean, there is a political struggle out there, and there are claims being made that the Iranian government is committing abuses, and they may say these things are not true. And having evidence that's been accumulated and collected according to a very high standard weakens the ability of the revisionists and the denialists. And I think I've learned from you, and this is why the collaboration, Dr. Milani, is so helpful. I've learned from you that the Iranian government does care about their perception, how they're viewed outside the West, outside Iran, and what the views of the West are, and knowing that this information is being gathered. And so I think, my friend's premise that this doesn't matter to the Iranian regime may be too categorical, and that this can perhaps in some cases cause actors in Iran to think about their behavior and perhaps to reduce the risk of abuses in some cases. And finally, I can imagine that it would be very important for the Iranian activists to know that outside in the world, there are people who are watching and there are people who are supporting. Even if we can't do anything at this moment, knowing that you're not alone, I think could be very powerful.
I think that's an incredibly powerful and important part, because the Iranian regime works on the premise that we can do whatever we want inside and no one is coming to your help. Hannah Arendt famously said, the model of a totalitarian society is a prison. and the prisoner is at the mercy of the guard for everything, and no one has the right to question. This kind of evidence gathering, contrary to what that gentleman or lady, I don't know who it was, who said it, precisely lets the prisoners in Iran know that you're not at the mercy of this guard.
Right.
The international community is watching, the Iranian diaspora is watching, and any of these guys or ladies, most of them are guys in this misogynist regime, if they ever dare come to Europe,
Right.
somebody might knock at the door and take them to court and have them pay. And eventually there is an end to this misery. And there is a day of reckoning for these people.
There is a day, I know we're running short on time, but I'll tell you, in my time in The Hague, when I was the legal counselor at the U.S. Embassy there, I did a lot of work with the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal. When I arrived in 1996, it was a bit of a new institution, really just getting going. No one knew whether it would be successful. And at some point during my time there, the tribunal indicted Slobodan Milosevic, the president of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And of course, the tribunal had no power to go in and arrest Milosevic. And everybody said, well, nothing will ever come of this. Milosevic isn't going to hand himself over. But one of the things that happened, one of the last things that I did in my time in The Hague was coordinate with the Dutch authorities the arrival of the flights that brought Slobodan Milosevic from Bosnia, where he'd been collected by S4 forces, to The Hague for his rendition to the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal. So there is no statute of limitations on these crimes. And we might think that today we're in power and we can get away with these things, but that isn't necessarily the case forever. And so I always think, Dr. Milani, when I think about this issue of accountability against these authoritarian regimes, I'm often reminded of the old aphorism that the ox is slow, but the earth is patient.
That's a wonderful story. The arc of justice, absolutely.
It bends.
It bends. Bailey, you want to say something to close the meeting? Because we're about to run out.
I think Alan did a great job. I want to just kind of emphasize the point he made, that I think the idea from this project originated from activists, and we hope that ultimately in pursuing this, that we elevate their experiences and in pursuit of justice, and that's really our major goal here.
Thank you very, very much.
And we look forward to collaboration with people at the conference and others. We need your expertise, and we need your help, and we need your support to be able to really make this a viable project.
And I think as we agreed, our first joint effort will be to organize that webinar, invite everybody who wants to come, and bring in all the expertise that you two think we should bring. And hopefully it will be the beginning of as they say in the movies, a beautiful friendship to end a very bad regime.
Very bad, yes. Well, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share the work that we're doing.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you
very much. Thank you for joining us.